They were told the Americans would never take them alive. They were told capture meant shame violation and death. So when an American soldier tore the dress of a Japanese woman prisoner of war on a beach in Saipan in the summer of 1944, everyone who saw it thought they knew exactly what would happen next. They were all wrong. What happened instead did not just save her leg. It shattered every lie she had ever been told about the enemy. And 40 years later, standing before 500 doctors, she would say that the man who tore her dress taught her that mercy is not weakness. Mercy is strength practiced on purpose. This is her story. The sky over Saipan had stopped shaking. It was July 15th, 1944. The silence felt worse than the explosions. Yuki Tanaka was 24 years old. She had been trained in Nagasaki, posted to the field hospital at Mount Tapachau. For weeks, she had wrapped shattered limbs with strips of old uniforms. The day the last radio went dead, she helped bury 2 surgeons behind the latrine trench. American voices rose from the trees. Marines in dust-stained khaki herded 8 survivors of the women's medical unit toward the beach. They moved like men tired of killing, but ready to do it again if needed. Yuki's left thigh throbbed. A mortar fragment had torn through muscle 2 days earlier. Blood had dried black gluing cloth to skin. Every step ripped it open again. The column reached a clearing near shore. Wrecked landing craft lay half buried in sand. Smoke drifted from the hills. Everything smelled like salt and ash. A tall man with a Red Cross armband waited beside a jeep. Lieutenant William Morrison, 32 years old, not armed, sleeves rolled past sunburned forearms. Round spectacles caught the dying light. A Marine nodded toward the women. Medical. Morrison looked over the group quickly. His gaze was clinical, tired. He pointed at Yuki's leg, then to the stretcher. A translator appeared. Young Navy corporal. He wants to treat you. You are hurt. Yuki heard treat and hurt, and her mind filled in the rest. The posters had been very clear about what Americans did to captured women. Morrison crouched low, studying the dark stains spreading down her leg. He murmured to the translator, "She will lose the leg if we wait." The words hit like a second shell. Yuki thought about the cliffs. High enough. Quick enough. Morrison pulled scissors from his field kit, held them up so she could see. The metal caught the light. He pointed at her blood-stiffened uniform. "Cut, I must cut." She shook her head violently. When he knelt and slipped the scissors under her torn uniform, Yuki screamed. The sound tore from her throat like something alive. Marines jerked upright. One raised his rifle. Yuki swung her fist, blindly caught Morrison's shoulder, stumbled backward, and fell hard. The wound tore open. Blood welled bright through old fabric. Fresh red. The red of now. Everyone froze. Then Morrison did the only thing he could. He dropped the scissors, raised both hands high, palms open, fingers spread, empty. Medkit. The translator ran with a green canvas pouch. Morrison opened it deliberately where Yuki could see everything. Gauze, white and clean, antiseptic powder, forceps gleaming, no weapon, no rope, no tools for the things propaganda promised. He poured iodine onto a cloth pad, pressed it against his own arm first, demonstrating. "Stop bleeding. You hurt. Me help." The translator repeated it. "He is doctor, not soldier. Please." Yuki stared at him, at his empty hands, at the gauze cleaner than anything she had seen in months, at the scissors lying in sand abandoned, no longer a threat. She nodded once, trembling. Morrison approached the way you move around a frightened animal. Slow, steady. He slit the fabric cleanly. The sound it made, cloth tearing from dried blood, made her wince. He worked quickly, rinsed with water, sprinkled sulfa powder, wrapped fresh gauze tight. When he tied the bandage off, his forearms were streaked with her blood. He looked up. Okay. For the first time since the invasion began, she saw no hatred in an enemy's face, only exhaustion, only something that looked like the word he had just said, a word that meant things could be fixed. But before Morrison's scissors touched her uniform, Yuki had already made a decision that should have killed her. 3 days earlier, when the senior medical officer ordered all nurses to take their own lives, Yuki had accepted the vial of poison with both hands. Then she had poured it into the sand when no one was looking. Something in her chest refused to stop beating. Something whispered that maybe the propaganda was wrong. In Tokyo, 2 years before, she had sat in a classroom with an army colonel who handed out the vials. If the Americans take you alive, they will shame you, then kill you slowly. Better to die with honor. But late one night, Yuki had whispered a question to another nurse. Why would they waste bullets on prisoners if they are winning? The other nurse left without answering. Next morning, Yuki was called to the commandant's office. 3 days in isolation, no food, no water, just time alone to learn that questions were more dangerous than Americans. She never asked again, but the question never stopped gnawing. If we are winning, why are we running out of bandages? Why are we eating bark soup? Why does the radio keep going silent? The answer was currently kneeling in sand with a first aid kit, about to show her the enemy was not what propaganda promised. Because torture you can resist. But mercy gets inside you. Mercy makes you question everything. That night, prisoners were loaded onto trucks toward the southern beach. Yuki sat wedged between two nurses, her leg throbbing but clean. The torn fabric fluttered against fresh gauze. She could feel the pressure of the bandage with every bump. In her mind, one image replayed. The doctor's hands stopping her bleeding instead of her life. The moment he raised his palms to show he carried no weapon. The moment he said okay like it was the simplest thing in the world. The transport ship USS Mercy waited off Saipan's coast. The women were guided up the ramp under guard, not chained, not beaten, just watched. Below deck, the air smelled of metal and disinfectant. Rows of cots lined the hold. Sailors carried buckets of fresh water. Doctors shouted orders in English that sounded like music because it was organized. Morrison moved among the wounded, notebook in pocket. When he reached Yuki's cot, she tried to sit up, but pain shot through her thigh. He gestured for her to stay still. Universal language. Rest. Through the translator, a young woman with kind eyes, he said the bleeding had stopped, but they would check for infection on Guam. Yuki whispered the only word of gratitude she knew. Arigato. Morrison hesitated, then smiled. Small, tired, human. You are welcome. His tone said what the words meant. You are safe now, you matter. The ship rolled northward. Days blurred. American nurses came often checking pulses, replacing bandages, offering broth. Some prisoners refused to eat, certain it was poison. But Yuki forced herself to sip, tasting salt and meat for the first time in weeks. Real chicken, real beef. At night, she dreamed of the scissors and woke trembling until she remembered the gauze. Each morning, she expected cruelty. Each morning, none came. When Guam appeared on the horizon, Morrison stood nearby with his clipboard. He looked distant, as if he too could not quite believe the war was ending. Yuki studied him from where she sat. She still did not trust him, not fully, but the image of his raised hands had carved itself into her mind, had become proof that maybe the enemy's kindness was real. As the ship eased into Apra Harbor, loudspeakers called orders. Translators repeated them. You will be examined. You will receive medicine. Do not fear. Fear was all they had left, but somewhere beneath it, Yuki felt the smallest pulse of something different. Not gratitude yet, not trust, just curiosity. Just the dangerous possibility that maybe the world was bigger than propaganda allowed. The gangway lowered. Sunlight poured down. The next chapter was about to begin. The next chapter of her healing. The next chapter of her slow, painful journey from hatred to hope. If you or someone you know served in the Pacific Theater during World War II, drop a comment below and share your story. Because what happened to Yuki over the next few months would be repeated in hospitals across the Pacific. But most of these stories were never told. Most of these moments of mercy were forgotten. Until now, the ship had a name that felt like mockery. USS Mercy. The translator said it in Japanese. Jihi, pity. The kind of thing a master shows a beaten dog. But what she would discover was not pity. It was something without a word in Japanese. Something that treated her not as inferior but as equal, who happened to be on the wrong side. And that equality, that was revolutionary. The medical hold smelled impossibly clean. Not disinfectant overwrought, actually clean. Like infection was preventable, not inevitable. It was the smell of American abundance. Rows of cots glowed under hanging lamps. American nurses moved like dancers in choreography. Everyone knew their part. No one was screaming. There was always more. More bandages, more medicine, more everything. In Japanese field hospitals, the rule was simple. Work through pain or die quietly. Supplies were for soldiers who could return to fighting. Everyone else learned to suffer in silence. But here, every patient had a chart. Every patient got scheduled medication. The wounded were treated not based on rank but on severity. The ones closest to dying got the most attention. Revolutionary. Yuki watched in stunned silence as an American nurse checked the pulse of a Japanese soldier who had tried to kill Americans days ago. The nurse's face was calm, focused. She adjusted his IV, marked his chart, moved on. No hatred, no revenge, just work. Other prisoners whispered, "It is a trick. They are fattening us for something worse." But Yuki was not so sure. She had seen the doctor's eyes on the beach. He had looked tired, and old, like someone who just wanted it to be over. Morrison moved among beds with his clipboard. When he reached Yuki's cot, she looked away. Remembering the scissors, her body tensed even though her mind whispered the fear was outdated. Through Sarah Chen, the translator, Morrison said the wound was healing well. Tomorrow they would give her medicine. Penicillin, the miracle drug. Yuki blinked. She had heard rumors of this medicine, stories that seemed too good to be true. If the Americans really had medicine that good, then Japan had already lost the war years ago. Untold, really? Sarah smiled. Really? The needle came that evening. A nurse prepared a syringe while Morrison checked Yuki's pulse. His touch was professional, but her heart still raced. The needle stung. Warmth spread up her arm like sunrise. For the first time in months, something shifted. The fever that had been building began to recede. The throbbing dulled. The exhaustion lifted. She slept without dreaming of bombs. Morning brought food. Real food. Not bark soup or weevil rice. Rice porridge rich and thick. Tinned fruit glowing golden. Soup smelling of vegetables and meat. Bread. Actual bread. The Japanese women stared. Afraid this was the moment. The moment when poison would be revealed. Americans watched patiently. No one forced them. A young nurse with red hair sat down beside one prisoner, took a spoonful from her own bowl, smiled, swallowed, then offered it. Only then did the woman lift her spoon. Only then did others follow. Yuki tasted sweetness, peach syrup from a can. Sugar hit her tongue and her eyes closed involuntarily. It had been years since she had tasted anything that was not smoke or salt or fear. Years since food had been about taste instead of survival. The sweetness spread like a memory of childhood, like summers before the war, like a time when eating was about pleasure. Her hands started shaking. Tears came, silent at first, then harder. From some deep place locked tight for 3 years. Sarah noticed, sat down beside her quietly, did not touch, just sat there. "I know," Sarah said softly. "It is hard to accept kindness from the enemy." Yuki tried to explain through tears, "Kindness is real." "But if you are not devils, then who are we?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that would change everything. "My family was put in camps too, in California, because we looked like you." Yeah, Yuki looked up, confused. "You are American. You wear the uniform." "Yes, and 2 years ago the American government took my parents, my grandparents, my little brother, and put them behind barbed wire. Not because they did anything wrong, just because we have Japanese faces. Manzanar Relocation Center. Armed guards, families in tar paper barracks. Dust storms, no privacy, no dignity." The words landed like stones in still water. "So you understand," Yuki whispered. "The confusion, the shame of surviving when others suffered. I understand being angry and grateful at the same time. I understand that countries are made of people and people are complicated. Sometimes the enemy is not the other side. Sometimes the enemy is the lie you have been told about the other side." Outside, rain began drumming on canvas. Yuki looked at the bowl of peaches, at the impossible sweetness of fruit that had traveled across an ocean to feed a prisoner who should have been left to die. That afternoon, Morrison returned with Sarah. He wanted Yuki to try walking. She stood, swayed, caught herself. Morrison checked the bandage, keeping appropriate distance. "Better." Yuki understood. The same in Japanese. "Beta." A word that traveled between languages because some things are universal. Morrison turned back through Sarah. The wound is clean. The fever is gone. In a few weeks you will walk without pain. You will live. You will go home. You will have a future. He paused. I want you to remember something. War ends when someone chooses to stop hurting. I chose to stop hurting you. Now you have a choice too. You can carry hate home or you can carry something else. The war does not have to live in your heart forever. Yuki stared at this tall American with tired eyes, at this enemy who had shown her more mercy than her own officers ever had. Through Sarah, she asked the question burning in her chest. Why help us? We are enemy. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. I lost my sister when I was 12. She died from diphtheria. She died because the local doctor refused to treat poor families. I became a doctor so I would never refuse anyone. Medicine does not see flags. Medicine sees wounds, and every wound deserves healing. That is not mercy. That is just being human. The words landed like another incision. Painful, necessary, irreversible. Yuki realized the hardest wound to heal was not flesh. Flesh knitted back together if you gave it time and medicine. The hardest wound to heal was belief, because flesh did not have to choose to heal, but beliefs you had to choose to change. Days on Guam settled into rhythm. Wake at dawn, medicine, food. The nurses laughed easily. They worked methodically. They moved like people who believed tomorrow would come. Yuki's bandages were changed every morning. The smell of antiseptic became almost comforting. Morrison appeared often checking the wound's color pulse temperature. Each time the awkward echo of that first encounter faded a little more. One evening he handed her a small tin of ointment for the scar. For after the bandages come off, to help the skin heal smooth. Yuki whispered, Arigato. Morrison smiled faintly. You are welcome. You are safe. Outside, Marines unloaded crates stamped U.S. medical supply. Word spread that some prisoners would be transferred to Hawaii for long-term recovery. Sarah mentioned Yuki's name. She froze. Hawaii, enemy homeland. Could mercy stretch that far? Or would that be where the mask dropped, where the trap sprung? That night, fever dreams took her to Mount Tapocho. Japanese officers shouting, ordering nurses to die with honor. Die for the emperor. She woke gasping to the sound of an American nurse humming a lullaby. The same country that produced bombs also produced this song. How could both exist? One had to be wrong. Which meant propaganda had lied. Which meant every death was for a lie. In the days that followed, her strength returned. She began helping nurses fold bandages, instinct taking over. The whole tent laughed quietly when she mimicked a thumbs-up gesture. For the first time since surrender, laughter did not sound like betrayal. The transfer order came on a morning when the sky was the color of clean metal. 2 weeks since Saipan. Yuki's small bundle felt impossibly light. A comb, a rolled bandage from Margaret, one faded photograph. Outside, jeeps rumbled toward the airstrip. A gray plane marked with a red cross idled like distant thunder. Yuki hesitated at the ramp. Morrison stood nearby checking manifests. When he saw her pause, he stepped closer. It is a short flight. You will be safe. She nodded but did not answer. Grateful and terrified. Hopeful and certain this was a trap. Inside the plane, metal benches lined the walls. The women sat silent. An American orderly moved down the aisle, tightening seatbelts, offering water. When the engines roared and the aircraft lifted, Yuki's stomach lurched. Through the window, she watched Guam shrink, a patch of green swallowed by blue. Morrison sat opposite, writing notes. The light showed lines deeper than before. 2 weeks had aged him years. She studied him quietly. What kind of enemy saved a life he had been taught to despise? What kind of doctor chose to heal instead of harm when the whole world was choosing the opposite? The plane hit turbulence and dropped suddenly. Yuki's hand shot out, gripping the bench. Across from her, Morrison looked up. His tone was calm, the voice of someone who had seen worse. Hours passed. When the first glint of land appeared, a whisper ran through the cabin. Honolulu. Yuki turned to Sarah, who sat with folded hands. You speak perfect Japanese. Where did you learn? Sarah hesitated, the kind of hesitation that comes before truth. I was born in California. My parents came from Osaka. You are Nisei, but you wear American uniform. Yes, and 2 years ago, my family was put in a camp, Manzanar, because we looked like you. Sarah continued, her voice quiet but steady. Armed guards, barbed wire, families in tar paper barracks, dust storms that buried everything. No privacy, no freedom, just fear and shame. My father used to say, we are Americans. This is our country too. But when you have a Japanese face, suddenly your country decides you might be the enemy. No trial, no proof, just fear. But you still serve them even after they put you in camp. Sarah smiled, not happy, the smile of someone who had thought about this every day for 2 years. I serve the idea of America. Not the America that put my family in camps, but the America where Morrison treats you like a human being, not because you are American, but because you are human. That America that is worth serving, even if it fails, even if it hurts. Because the idea is bigger than the failure. And that is when Yuki understood something profound. America was not perfect. It had put its own citizens in camps just for looking like the enemy. It had made mistakes. But unlike the Japan she knew where questioning authority meant death, America was a place where people could acknowledge mistakes and still believe in improvement. Where Sarah could wear the uniform even after betrayal. Where Morrison could treat the enemy with dignity. Where the country's worst moments did not erase the possibility of better moments. Morrison treating her with dignity was not because America had always been right. It was because America's best citizens chose to be better than the country's worst moments. The island rose from the sea like something imagined. Green mountains, harbors full of ships, sunlight striking glass windows of buildings untouched by war. Yuki pressed her forehead to the window and felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, her entire understanding of reality. Honolulu was alive. Buildings stood tall and whole. The harbor functioned. Streets had cars. Store windows displayed goods. Children rode bicycles, wore clean clothes, looked fed and healthy. But what made Yuki's hands start shaking was not the abundance. It was the date on a newspaper stand they passed. October 12, 1944. She did the math in her head. The war was still happening, right now. While Americans ate breakfast in restaurants and children played in parks, Japanese cities were burning. While she had been healing in Hawaii, Saipan was still smoldering. While she slept in clean sheets, her countrymen were starving. The Americans were not winning because they had defeated Japan. They were winning because they could wage total war while their citizens lived normal lives. Because they had so much abundance that even the war could not touch their homeland. Because they were fighting a two-front war across two oceans while their children still played baseball. And in that moment, Yuki felt the full weight of what the war had cost. Not just lives, truth. If America could spare resources to heal enemy prisoners while maintaining cities like this, then Japan had never stood a chance. The propaganda had said America was weak, starving, on the verge of collapse. But looking down at Honolulu, Yuki understood. Japan was the one starving. Japan was the one crumbling. Japan was the one asking for more sacrifices because the last 1,000 had accomplished nothing. And the leaders had known, must have known, which meant every soldier who died, every nurse who starved, every civilian who jumped off a cliff, all of it was for a lie. The landing was smooth, doors open, warm air rushed in carrying the smell of flowers and cut grass and bread baking. Smells of peace, ambulances waited. Clean, organized, hospital personnel in crisp white. American families visiting soldiers. A wife holding her husband's hand. A little girl with a doll running to her father. Yuki saw an American soldier holding his daughter. The girl had ribbons in her hair. The soldier was laughing, throwing her up in the air while she shrieked with delight. Something in Yuki's chest twisted so hard she thought she might vomit. How? She turned to Sarah. How is everything still standing? Because the war is not being fought here. The war is in Japan. America's cities have not been touched. But we were told America was starving, that American children were eating rations. Sarah's face was sad. And what were you eating on Saipan, Wo? Bark soup, weevils. And American prisoners in your camp, Yuki looked away. Less than that. So who was starving? The silence was the sound of a worldview collapsing. Tripler Army Medical Center sat on a hillside, a real building, Concrete and glass and electricity. Inside floors were clean, walls painted, windows intact. An American nurse led Yuki to a bed, a real bed, with a mattress, sheets, a pillow. Your room, rest now, dinner at 6. Dinner at 6, like meals happened on schedule regardless of bombs or attacks. Like food was a guarantee instead of a hope. Over the next 4 months, Yuki would receive physical therapy, but the real therapy was learning to exist in a world where everything she had been taught was backwards. And the lesson that broke through came from a baseball game. October 1944. The World Series was playing on the radio. St. Louis Cardinals versus St. Louis Browns. American soldiers gathered around like it was the most important thing in the world. Men who had been fighting for years. Men who had lost friends. And they cared about baseball. Yuki watched from the doorway, confused. There is a war happening. Why do they care about a game? Sarah stood beside her. Americans play games even during war. It is how they remember what they are fighting for. The right to have normal life. To care about things that do not matter. To waste time on joy. The soldiers cheered, groaned, argued, threw peanuts when calls went wrong. Morrison saw Yuki watching and waved her in. Come, sit. You should see this. She sat nervously. An American soldier offered her peanuts. Here, you cannot watch baseball without peanuts. That is un-American. He grinned, friendly, just sharing. She took the peanuts, cracked one open, tasted salt and crunch in impossible normalcy. You understand baseball, the soldier asked. No. Good, neither do half the guys here, but we pretend we do. Everyone laughed, not mockery, just people being ridiculous and not caring. Morrison joined the laughter. Hey, explain the infield fly rule. I am a doctor, not a miracle worker. More laughter. Yuki sat surrounded by American soldiers who shared peanuts and argued about rules and made jokes. And sitting there listening to them be ordinary and human and ridiculous, she understood something no propaganda had ever shown. These men were not monsters. They were just men. Men who missed baseball, and that ordinariness, that simple, boring humanity was more terrifying than any demon could be. Because you can fight monsters. But how do you fight men who share peanuts? How do you hate people who care more about a game than about grinding you into the dirt? You cannot. And that is when Yuki realized America was winning, not because they were better fighters, but because they never stopped being human. Even in war, they made room for baseball and bacon and laughter. And Japan had forgotten how to be anything except soldiers. You cannot beat an enemy who remembers joy when you have forgotten what joy even is. December came cold and clear. Morrison was rotating back to the Pacific. He came to say goodbye, brought a gift, an English anatomy textbook. Heavy, expensive. Your leg is healed, the limp will fade, but I want you to have this. He opened to the title page, written by hand, for Yuki who already knows how to heal. I cannot read English well. Then learn, because after this war, Japan will need doctors who understand that medicine is about healing, not about loyalty to emperors or flags. Medicine is about choosing to stop hurting even when hurting would be easier. You understand that now. Do not forget it. Yuki wanted to thank him properly. Wanted to explain what his mercy had meant, but she did not have the words, so she bowed deeply. The formal bow of respect for teachers and masters and people who have changed your life. Morrison nodded, understanding without words. You will be repatriated soon. When you go home, you will see things that will make you question everything we have done here. But I want you to remember this. Kindness is not betrayal. Accepting help from an enemy does not make you a traitor. It makes you human. And being human is never wrong. The words settled into her chest like seeds, like something that would grow later. In May 1945, the repatriation order came. The voyage home began on a morning when the sky refused to commit to color. Gray bleeding into white, bleeding into palest blue. They loaded the repatriation ship in Honolulu Harbor under watch of military police and Red Cross observers. Yuki carried 3 things: Morrison's textbook, Margaret's rolled bandage, the photograph of ghosts. Everything else fit in her pockets. The ship smelled of diesel and salt and departure, endings that were also beginnings. They were given bunks in a converted troop compartment. canvas hammocks. The ship pulled away from Oahu in late afternoon. Yuki stood at the rail and watched the island shrink, watched the last piece of America disappear, and she felt something crack, the shell around the part that had learned to hope. Because hope was dangerous sailing toward a country that had been burning for months. The voyage to Yokohama would take days. Time stopped meaning days and nights. It became a string of moments. Morning ration, temperature check, roll call. A week into the voyage, letters arrived. The Red Cross had been collecting mail for months, sorting matching names to prisoners, trying to connect the living to whoever might still be alive. Some letters got through, most did not. A woman named Ko received a letter on the 8th day of the voyage. She was older than Yuki, maybe 35. Hands that shook from malaria. She had been a school teacher before the war. Ko read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. She did not cry, did not scream, just sat there staring at nothing. Sarah found Yuki that evening. Ko's sister died in March. Starvation. Ko wanted you to know. She said you would understand. Yuki did understand. Ko's sister had been 12 years old, the same age as Morrison's sister when she died from diphtheria. Morrison's sister died in America where doctors could refuse to treat poor families. Ko's sister died in Japan where there was nothing to treat anyone with. Different countries, different wars, same result. Children dead because adults failed them. While Ko's 12-year-old sister had been eating bark soup in Okinawa and dying slowly of hunger, Yuki had been eating bacon and eggs in Honolulu and gaining weight. While Japanese children starved, American doctors were using expensive penicillin to save enemy nurses. And that was worse than torture. Torture you could hate, but kindness from the enemy while your own people suffered, that got inside you. That night, Yuki could not sleep. She lay in her hammock and stared at the ceiling and thought about the bacon, the peaches, the baseball game, the abundance Americans called normal. She thought about Ko's sister dead at 12 and Morrison's sister dead at 12, both killed by systems that valued some lives more than others. But Morrison had chosen to change his system, had chosen to become a doctor who treated everyone, had chosen mercy when hatred would have been easier. Could Japan do the same? Could she? The question kept her awake until dawn. On the 5th morning, they saw land. Japan. The ship approached Yokohama Harbor, under a sky the color of old dishwater. No one cheered. The women just stood at the rails and stared at what used to be their country. Smoke still hung over the port, even though fires had been out for months. Not the smoke of burning, the smoke of ash that would not settle, because you cannot burn that many buildings without leaving a stain on the sky. Cranes twisted like broken ribs. Warehouses lay open like cracked teeth. Whole blocks were flattened, not damaged, erased. Closer in, Yuki saw people along the pier wearing whatever cloth they could find. Rags, blankets, curtains. No one waved, no birds. That was what struck her. In Hawaii, there had been birds. But here, silence. A harbor without sound. A city without life. Yuki's stomach turned cold. She had known there was bombing. American B-29 firebombing raids had burned Tokyo, Yokohama, Kobe, Osaka. She knew that as a fact. But knowing is not the same as seeing. Knowing is numbers, statistics, 30% destroyed. Knowing is abstract. Seeing is standing on deck and understanding that 30% was someone's home, someone's entire life reduced to ash. The gangway dropped. Allied occupation signs were posted everywhere. English and Japanese. Orders from General MacArthur. The orderliness felt almost cruel against the ruin behind it. Yuki walked down clutching Morrison's textbook. Her legs still ached, but held. The scar tissue pulled tight, but pulled strong. Healed. American medicine had done what it promised. She knew what people saw when they looked at her. Clean skin, healthy face. She looked fed. She looked cared for. She looked like someone who had survived while others had not. And that survival felt like an accusation. The registration desk was staffed by Japanese civil officers under Allied supervision. The man behind the desk looked like he had aged 100 years. His uniform hung loose. His eyes were hollow. Name, place of origin. Any surviving family. Tanaka Yuki, Nagasaki, my mother if she is alive. The clerk's eyes flicked up, sharp. At the word Nagasaki, his hand paused. Long pause. Then quietly, almost gently, "I hope she is alive." The bomb. The Americans dropped a new type of bomb there. Last August, the entire city. His voice trailed off. Did not finish. Everyone knew what happened when you did not finish sentences about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. What happened was too big for words. Yuki felt the floor tilt. She knew about Hiroshima. Everyone knew. A single bomb, one blast, city gone. But Nagasaki had been hit too, days later. When surrender was inevitable, when the war was effectively over, but no one had signed the papers yet. She had been in Saipan when it happened, bleeding into sand, had not heard anything until Honolulu, until she was already saved, already eating peaches. Now the clerk's voice made it real. Her legs shook. Morrison had saved her leg while Americans bombed her mother, had wrapped her wound while atomic fire consumed her city. How do you reconcile that? How do you hold both truths? You cannot, which means you break, or you choose. Outside the customs shed, a soup station had been set up. American military personnel serving soup to Japanese civilians, the same uniforms that had dropped bombs now ladling broth into tin cups. A woman in a patched kimono leaned forward, eyes desperate. Behind her, a child with a shaved head swayed on his feet. Thin, so thin you could see the skull beneath the skin. Yuki watched an American soldier ladle soup into the woman's cup. Watched her drink like it was the first liquid in days. Watched the child drain the last drops. Watched them bow, not in gratitude, in reflex. And standing there watching an American soldier feed a Japanese child while Yokohama smoldered, Yuki understood something that would define the rest of her life. There are no simple stories. The Americans who saved her were the same Americans who bombed Nagasaki. The enemy who showed mercy was the same enemy who showed her mother what she did not even know yet. Alive or dead, ash or survivor. Morrison had been one man making one choice on one beach, but he was part of a country that made other choices. Choices that killed, choices that burned. How do you live with that? How do you breathe when gratitude and grief are fighting for the same air you choose? You choose what to carry forward. You choose whether mercy matters more than revenge. You choose whether healing is possible or whether hate is all that remains. You choose. They sent her north by rail. Trains were still running, barely. Some cars had no glass. Some had benches made from scrap wood. The trip to Tokyo took hours. The landscape was like a wound that had scabbed but not healed. Farm fields, then sudden stretches of charred earth where villages had been. At Ueno Station, Yuki stepped down into a city that did not look like a city anymore. Tokyo had been the heart of an empire. Now it was piles and paths, ash and memory. Blocks that once held wooden houses were now flattened open spaces, makeshift shelters built from tin and burned timbers. Yuki moved through the streets like a ghost. She had an address, written on a scrap of paper, her mother's last known location. If she was still there, if she was still alive, she walked until the ache in her thigh returned, then walked farther. She found the address, or what used to be. There was no Block 7 anymore, just a foundation. Beams, cloth draped over what remained. And sitting on that foundation, staring at nothing, was a woman. Small, smaller than Yuki remembered. Older in a way that had nothing to do with years. Cheeks hollow, skin cracked and gray. But the eyes were the same. Sharp, present, alive. For a few seconds, neither spoke. They only stared. Mother and daughter, survivor and survivor. Then her mother whispered one word, Yuki. Not a question, a statement. Proof of a prayer granted. She crossed the dirt floor, put both hands on her daughter's face, held her like checking to make sure she was real. For a long moment, Yuki could not breathe. She had imagined this reunion so many times. In every version, she came home broken. In every version, her mother was the strong one. She had never once imagined coming home strong, fed, with clean bandages and American medical supplies, with knowledge that she had been saved by the people who destroyed her mother's world. Her mother pulled back just enough to look at her arm. Her face, her leg, her gaze paused where the bandage still wrapped Yuki's thigh. You are whole. The words came out as a whisper, as an accusation, as a blessing, as all three at once. Yuki felt tears burn. I am whole. Then the guilt hit so hard she had to sit. Her mother sat beside, did not touch, did not speak, just waited. The way mothers wait when daughters need to find words for impossible things. Finally, they treated you well. Yuki nodded, could not speak. The leg, American doctor, on Saipan. He had scissors. I thought she could not finish. But he bandaged you instead, gave you medicine. Yes, penicillin, clean bandage, food every day. They flew me to Hawaii, real hospital, real beds, baseball games on radio as if no war at all. Her mother's face did something complicated, relief and grief and something harder to name. She took Yuki's hand, thin fingers, cold, but strong. I was in Tokyo visiting your aunt when the bomb fell. That is why I am alive. But your grandmother, your cousins, the house you grew up in, the street where you learned to walk, all of it, the word gone hung unspoken. Yuki's throat closed. While I was eating bacon in Hawaii, her mother squeezed her hand harder. While you were surviving, that is not shame, that is luck. Terrible, unfair, impossible luck. But luck nonetheless. But they saved me, the same people who dropped the bomb. The same country that burned Nagasaki also wrapped my wounds. How do I carry both truths? How do I be grateful for my life and mourn for yours at the same time? Her mother pulled something from her pocket, a scrap of newspaper, American, English words. She pointed to a photograph. General MacArthur, occupation forces, food distribution. We eat because of them now. We survive because of their rations. Same country, same soldiers. Some maybe flew planes, maybe dropped bombs. Now they hand out rice. Now they rebuild roads. She folded the paper carefully. You know what I learned these months? Some of them remembered how to be human again. Even after all of it, even after killing us, they chose to stop. That is not weakness. That is harder than fighting ever was. She looked at Yuki with eyes that had seen too much but refused to go blind. You can carry hate home. Many will. They will hate Americans forever, and I cannot blame them. My mother died in an atomic fire. Your cousins were children, 6 years old and 9 years old. They burned. How do you forgive that? Maybe you do not. Maybe you carry it forever like a scar. But you have been given something else. You have been shown that the enemy can choose mercy, that war can end when someone decides it should, that healing is possible even when it seems impossible. What will you do with that knowledge? Yuki looked at Morrison's textbook in her lap. At the English words she could barely read. At the inscription, for Yuki who already knows how to heal. I will learn English. Then I will learn to be a better doctor than I was, and I will teach others. Her mother smiled, sad, tired, but real. Then you have already chosen. That is good, because Japan will need doctors who understand what you understand now. That medicine is not about loyalty. It is about seeing the person in front of you and deciding they matter more than the war tried to kill them. They sat together on the ruins of what used to be home. Mother and daughter, survivors, two people who had seen the worst humans could do to each other, and were choosing somehow to believe the best was still possible. Outside, an American Jeep rolled past. The soldiers did not look, did not threaten, just drove on, trying to turn enemies into something else, trying to remember the war was over even when anger was not. Yuki felt Morrison's words come back. Being human is never wrong. She would spend the rest of her life trying to prove that true. Her mother stood slowly. Come, I will show you where we live now. They walked through streets that used to have names, past foundations that used to be houses. Her mother's shelter was a lean-to, corrugated metal, canvas, 2 blankets, a kerosene lamp, a pot for cooking rice when there was rice. This is home now, not much, but dry. Yuki set down her bundle, pulled out the tin of scar ointment, the rolled bandage, the textbook. Her mother touched the book gently like something sacred, something dangerous. You will need light to read this, and time, and peace, none of which we have. Yuki sat on the blanket that smelled like smoke and salt and survival. Then I will make time, and when there is no peace, I will read anyway. Because Morrison said Japan will need doctors who understand that medicine is about healing, not about loyalty to emperors or flags. And he was right. Her mother nodded. Then sleep now. Tomorrow we register you at the ward office. You will need papers, ration cards, authorization to work. The Americans are efficient about such things. That night, lying on a blanket in a shelter made of scrap metal, Yuki could not sleep. She stared at the ceiling that was not a ceiling and listened to her mother breathe and thought about the choice she had made. She would not forget Nagasaki, would not forget her grandmother's face or her cousin's laughter, would not forget that the same country that showed her mercy showed her family atomic fire. But she would also not forget Morrison's hands raising in the sun to show he meant no harm, would not forget Sarah's quiet strength, would not forget the baseball game and peanuts and laughter. She would carry both truths, the bombing and the healing, the destruction and the mercy, the hate and the hope, and somehow impossibly build a life from the space between them. Because that was what survival meant now, not choosing one truth over the other, but learning to hold both, learning to live in the contradiction, learning to be grateful for mercy while mourning loss, learning to heal others because someone had chosen to heal her. The war had taught her humans could be monsters. Morrison had taught her monsters could choose to be human again. And tomorrow she would begin the work of teaching that lesson to others. 2 years later, Yuki stood in what had been Tokyo Imperial Hospital, half destroyed, but half standing, and that half was enough. The West Wing had survived. 3 floors, 60 beds, a surgical theater with a roof that only leaked when it rained hard. American authorities had authorized its reopening as a civilian facility. Japanese staff, American supplies, a compromise that kept people alive. Yuki wore a white coat now, too big, sleeves past her wrists, but hers. Her first patient of the morning was a boy, 8 years old, a cut on his arm from scavenging metal. The wound had been ignored for 3 days. Now it was angry, red, green at the edges. His mother stood behind him, thin, suspicious, eyes that had seen too much. We do not want American medicine. This is enemy medicine. I will not let you poison my son. Yuki looked up, met the mother's eyes, saw the rage, the grief, the terrible certainty that accepting help from the enemy was betrayal. She understood that rage, had felt it herself, still carried it, still felt it flare hot whenever she saw American jeeps rolling through Japanese streets. But she had also learned something else. May I tell you a story? Yuki asked her quietly. The mother's jaw tightened. I do not want stories. This story is short, and after you hear it, you can still refuse treatment. But I need you to hear it first. The mother hesitated, then nodded once. Sharp, grudging. Yuki took a breath and began. July 1944, Saipan. I was a nurse with the Imperial Army, 24 years old. I had been told that if the Americans captured me, they would torture me, kill me slowly. I was given poison. I poured the poison in the sand. I chose to surrender. When they found me, I had a wound on my leg. An American doctor said I would lose the leg. He pulled out scissors to cut my uniform. I thought he was going to hurt me. I screamed. I hit him. I fell in the sand and waited to die. He dropped the scissors, raised his hands to show they were empty. Then he bandaged my wound using his own supplies, gave me penicillin, American medicine that should have been saved for American soldiers. But he gave it to me instead, an enemy. The mother was listening now. They flew me to Hawaii, to a real hospital. For 4 months, American doctors treated me. American nurses changed my bandages. American soldiers shared their rations. They played baseball on the radio and offered me peanuts. They treated me like a human being, not like an enemy, just like someone who needed help. Yuki pulled up her pant leg, showed the scar, long, pink, healed. This is what American medicine did. It saved my leg. It saved my life. And when they sent me home, they gave me a textbook and told me to learn. To teach others that medicine is not about loyalty to flags. It is about seeing the person in front of you and deciding they matter. She looked at the boy. His eyes were wide, scared, but curious. I was in Hawaii eating bacon and eggs when the bomb fell on Nagasaki. My grandmother died in the atomic fire. My 2 cousins. 6 years old and 9 years old. They burned. My mother survived only because she was in Tokyo that day. So I know what you feel. I know the rage. I know the grief. I know what it means to owe your life to the same country that killed your family. The mother's face cracked, just slightly. But I also know this. If I refuse to use American medicine because I hate Americans, then my cousins died for nothing. If I let your son's arm rot because I am too proud to accept help from the enemy, then the war never ends. It just keeps killing, one infection at a time, one child at a time. Yuki stood, pulled a vial of penicillin from the cabinet, held it up to the light. This medicine was made by the same country that dropped the bombs. I will not lie to you about that, but it is also medicine that works. And refusing it will not bring back the dead. It will only create more dead. She set the vial on the table between them. The choice is yours, but I will tell you what the American doctor told me. Being human is never wrong. And sometimes being human means accepting help from people you hate, because the person in front of you matters more than the pride in your heart. The mother stared at the vial, at her son's arm, at the infection spreading, at the future narrowing to two paths, pride or survival. She looked at Yuki, at the scar, at the white coat, at the eyes that had seen the same fire and chose to keep burning anyway. Give him the medicine. The needle went in clean. The boy gasped but did not cry. His mother held his other hand. Come back tomorrow. We will check for improvement. We will not give up. The mother nodded, then quietly, thank you. Yuki shook her head. Do not thank me. Thank the American doctor who taught me that mercy is stronger than hate. Thank your own courage for choosing your son's life over your pride. She walked them to the exit, watched them disappear into Tokyo's streets. Two people who had chosen survival over vengeance. Two people who had let the war end, at least for today. The months that followed brought more patients, more mothers who refused treatment until they heard the story, more children whose lives were saved by American medicine administered by a Japanese doctor who carried an American textbook and an American lesson. The story spread, whispered at first, then spoken aloud, then told over and over until it became legend. The nurse from Saipan who was saved by the enemy. The doctor who chose mercy over revenge. One day in early 1948, a woman came to the hospital. She stood in the doorway and spoke very quietly. Is it true, the story about the American doctor, about Saipan, about choosing to accept help from the enemy? Yuki set down her pen. Yes, it is true. The woman nodded slowly. My husband was killed by Americans. Okinawa, 1945. For 2 years I have hated every American soldier I see, but my daughter is sick, and she is dying, and I do not know what to do. Yuki stood, walked around the desk, sat beside the woman, did not touch, did not speak, just sat there while the woman cried quietly. Finally, Yuki said, asking for help is not forgiveness. Letting your daughter live is not betrayal. You carry both by being human, by being complicated, by refusing to be simple. You hate them for what they took, and you accept their help for what they can give. That is what it means to survive war instead of being destroyed by it. Well, will you help her? Yes, bring her tomorrow. We will do what we can. The work continued. Months became years. The hospital grew. More doctors, more patients, more stories of American medicine saving Japanese lives. In 1952, a letter arrived. American stamps, English handwriting. Dear Yuki, I do not know if this letter will reach you, but I think of you often. I am teaching now at the University of Chicago, medical school. I tell my students about you, about the beach on Saipan, about the choice to stop hurting. I tell them that mercy is not weakness, that being human is never wrong. If this letter reaches you, please know that you taught me as much as I taught you, that somewhere in this world a Japanese nurse is alive because an American doctor decided she deserved to live, and that makes every difficult day worthwhile. With respect and hope, William Morrison, MD. Yuki read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and placed it in the textbook. On the page about wound care, on the section that had saved her life, she wanted to reply, wanted to tell Morrison that yes, she was alive. Yes, she was teaching others. Yes, his mercy had rippled forward, but the words would not come. How do you tell someone they saved your life and destroyed your country at the same time? So instead, Yuki kept the letter, kept it as proof that Morrison remembered, that the moment on the beach had mattered to him too, that mercy was something he carried forward. And maybe that was enough. The years that followed were not easy, but they were possible. Yuki taught first one student, then others. Young doctors who wanted to learn American techniques, but also wanted to understand the philosophy underneath. That medicine saw wounds, not flags. That being human was never wrong. She built a reputation, not famous, but respected. The doctor who had been saved by the enemy and chose to save others. The teacher who believed that mercy was stronger than hate. In 1965, an American medical delegation came to Japan. One of the American doctors sought her out. Dr. Tanaka, my name is Robert Miller. I am from the University of Chicago. I was a student of Dr. William Morrison. Yuki's breath caught. Morrison, the name she had not spoken aloud in 20 years. He told us about you, about Saipan, about the choice he made on that beach, about mercy being strength practiced on purpose. He is still teaching at the University of Chicago. He sent me to find you. He wanted you to know that your survival mattered to him, that teaching mercy to his students is the most important work he has ever done, and that he learned it from you as much as you learned it from him. Did he know what happened to me? Robert nodded. I told him. In 1963, I wrote to the hospital, found out you were still working, still teaching. I wrote to him and told him. He cried. I have never seen him cry before, but he cried when he heard you survived, that you were healing others. Robert pulled an envelope from his bag. He wanted me to give you this. Yuki took the envelope with shaking hands, opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph, black and white, faded, a beach, a woman sprawled in sand, a man with raised hands, the moment captured by a Navy photographer. Yuki stared at the photograph, at her own face, 24 years old, terrified, at Morrison's hands raised to show they were empty, at the moment when mercy became possible, the moment when the war started to end. On the back, Morrison had written in steady handwriting, to Yuki, proof that mercy is real, proof that you survived, proof that being human is never wrong. With gratitude for teaching me that healing goes both ways, I hope this finds you still healing others. WM 1965. Morrison had kept this photograph for 20 years, waiting, hoping. And now, through Robert, he finally knew. Knew she survived, knew she was healing others, knew his mercy had rippled forward through decades. Yuki pressed the photograph to her chest. After 20 years of silence, Morrison knew. And knowing he knew, knowing he understood what his choice had created, that was enough. Will you tell him something for me? Yuki asked quietly. Of course, Moaz. Tell him his lesson is still teaching. That mercy ripples forward even when we cannot see the waves. That being human is never wrong. And that I will carry his words until the day I die. Robert's eyes glistened. I will tell him. He will be honored to know. Thank you, Yuki said quietly, for telling him, for bringing this photograph. Robert nodded. It mattered more than he knew. I have taught hundreds of students, and every one of them knows your story, knows Morrison's choice, knows that mercy is strength practiced on purpose. That lesson will outlive both of you, because mercy is the only thing that lasts. The years continued. More students, more patience, more stories of mercy practiced in small ways that rippled outward. By 1983, Yuki was 63 years old, silver hair, reading glasses, white coat worn thin by 40 years of work. She had moved to the university, professor of medicine, teaching the next generation. One November afternoon, her granddaughter visited. Akiko, 22 years old, medical student, third year. Grandmother, Akiko said, I need to ask you something. Why do you keep teaching? You are 63. You have earned rest. Why does it matter so much? Yuki looked at her granddaughter, saw herself, saw the questioning, the searching for meaning. Let me tell you something I have never told anyone. I do not teach because I have forgiven the Americans. I teach because I am still learning to forgive myself, for surviving when others did not, for accepting help from the enemy when my family was burning. Every student I teach is a way of justifying my survival. Every patient I save is a way of earning the mercy Morrison showed me. Every story I tell is a way of proving that my life mattered, that the choice he made on that beach was worth it. Yuki took off her glasses. I do not know if mercy is strength. I do not know if being human is never wrong. I do not know if the war ended, or if we just stopped shooting and started carrying it inside us forever. But I know this. Every student who learns that mercy is possible is a seed planted. Every patient who survives because I taught their doctor that medicine sees wounds, not flags, is a ripple forward. That is why I teach. Akiko was quiet. Then, Grandmother, will you teach me the real story, not the legend, the messy truth? Will you teach me how to carry it? Yuki smiled, sad, tired, but real. Yes, I will teach you, because that is what mercy is. Passing forward not the perfect lesson, but the honest one. Not the story that makes sense, but the story that is true. She opened her desk drawer, pulled out Morrison's textbook. 40 years old, pages yellow, spine cracked, but still teaching. She opened to the inscription. For Yuki, who already knows how to heal. I did not know how to heal, not really, but I learned. And now I will teach you, and you will teach others, and it will continue, generation after generation, until mercy is not a lesson we have to learn, until it is just what we do. That is my legacy, not that I survived, but that I chose to heal, not that I forgave, but that I kept trying, not that I resolved the contradictions, but that I learned to carry them. On December 1st, 1983, Dr. Yuki Tanaka sat alone in her office. The building was quiet, just her in the silence and the photograph from Chicago. She held the picture in her hands, the beach, the blood. Morrison's raised hands, her own face twisted in terror. The moment before mercy became possible. Outside, Tokyo hummed with life. The city had been rebuilt so thoroughly you could almost forget it had been ash. Almost forget that 38 years ago it had been a graveyard. Japan had survived, not by being perfect, but by being messy and complicated and human, by learning from the enemy, by accepting help when help was offered, by choosing to heal instead of hate. And she had been part of that survival, a small part. Just one doctor teaching a lesson she was still learning herself. But small parts mattered. One person choosing mercy could change everything. Yuki thought about Morrison, dead now for 20 years, gone without ever knowing the full extent of what his choice had created, without seeing the students she taught, the patients she saved. She hoped he knew, hoped that somehow he understood that his hands raised on a beach in Saipan had saved not just her leg but thousands of lives, that his choice to stop hurting had rippled forward through decades, that his mercy was still teaching, still healing. Yuki closed her eyes, felt tired, so tired, tired of teaching, tired of carrying contradictions, tired of being complicated when simplicity would be easier, tired of justifying her existence, tired of earning mercy. But then she thought about Akiko, about all the students who had learned that mercy was possible, about all the patients whose lives had been saved because someone remembered that medicine saw wounds, not flags, about all the small choices that rippled forward, creating waves that changed the world. And she knew she would keep going, would keep teaching, would keep telling the story, because that was what it meant to be human. Not to resolve the mess, but to live in it, to choose mercy in spite of it. She opened Morrison's textbook one more time, read the inscription that had become her prayer. For Yuki, who already knows how to heal. She had not known, not really. She had only been willing to learn, willing to accept help from the enemy, willing to let mercy crack the wall of hate, willing to be complicated when the world wanted her to be simple. And maybe that was enough. Maybe willingness was all mercy required. Maybe healing was not about having the answer, but about asking the question. Maybe being human was not about being perfect, but about trying anyway. Yuki walked home through the streets of Tokyo, past buildings that had been ash, past people who had been enemies, past a future that had once seemed impossible but was now just ordinary. She reached her home, not a shelter anymore, a real house, small, modest, but hers. Her mother was waiting, 83 years old now, silver hair, bent back, but still here. Yuki sat beside her. They did not speak, just sat together. Two women who had seen the worst humans could do. Two women who had chosen to keep living anyway. After a while, her mother said, "You look tired." "I am tired, but you will teach tomorrow anyway." "Yes, I will teach tomorrow anyway." "Good, because the students need to hear it. The lesson matters." "How do you know?" "Because you are here, because Morrison chose mercy and you survived. Because you chose mercy and thousands of others survived. Because mercy ripples forward even when you cannot see the waves. Because being human is never wrong, even when being human is hard." Yuki leaned against her mother, felt the weight shift slightly, felt the burden shared. And tomorrow she would teach it again, would tell the story again, would plant seeds again. Because that was what survivors did. They carried the lesson forward. They healed others. They chose to be human even when being human was the hardest thing in the world. Because mercy was not weakness. Mercy was strength practiced on purpose. And that strength would outlive them all, Dr. Yuki Tanaka continued teaching until 1995 at the age of 75. She trained over 500 doctors. Each one learned the story of the beach. Each one learned that mercy was possible. Each one carried the lesson forward. Lieutenant William Morrison died in Chicago in 1987 at the age of 75, having taught medicine for 42 years. He never met Yuki again after December 1944, but he kept her photograph on his desk until he died. And every student he taught knew her story. When Yuki died in 1995, her granddaughter Akiko found Morrison's textbook among her belongings. The pages were worn thin. The spine was broken. But inside, tucked between pages about wound care, were two photographs. One of a beach in Saipan, a woman sprawled in sand, a man with raised hands, the moment before mercy became possible, and one of a woman standing before medical students, silver hair, white coat, eyes that had seen too much but refused to go blind, teaching, still teaching, always teaching. On the back of the second photograph, Yuki had written, "To whoever finds this, tell the story, teach mercy. Remember that being human is never wrong. The war ends when someone chooses to stop hurting, choose." Waidi Akiko kept both photographs, kept the textbook, kept teaching the lesson her grandmother had taught her, and the legacy continued. Because mercy is not one person. It is everyone. It is every small choice repeated until change becomes possible. It is every act of trust that ripples forward, creating waves that change the world. That is the power of choosing kindness when the world expects cruelty. That is the strength of the greatest generation. Not the firepower, the mercy.